So welcome once again to our faith formation talk on this Old Testament heroes series. And today the hero is Joseph, and I call him the protector of families. This is the name I give him. Why? At the end of the talk, probably you would have the answer yourself. Joseph is my favorite Old Testament hero compared to other heroes. Like we heard of Jacob last week. Jacob was a bit of a cunning, deceitful man, but Joseph was very righteous, very honorable, and he was very dedicated to the call that God has entrusted to him. And he made good use of God's gift for him. Uh, and eventually, it was he who uh, brought his family back together, all reunited. Uh, yeah, this is the beginning of the talk, but I'm actually already summarizing Joseph, just to show you how much I admire Joseph. A little bit of his background. Joseph was the son of Jacob and Rachel. We mentioned about Jacob last week, and that Jacob actually married two sisters, Leah and Rachel, and out of the union with Rachel, two sons were born, Joseph and Benjamin. The whole family, they lived in the land of Canaan, and Joseph had 10 half brothers because that 10 brothers, they were from Jacob's first wife, and he got one full brother, Benjamin, and at least one half sister. Well, Old Testament time, they don't really pay much attention on uh, women. So if a woman's name is mentioned, usually was because of some special circumstances and so forth. But usually they only mention about men. So the firstborn of Rachel and number 11 of the 12 sons Jacob had. And of all the sons, Joseph was preferred by his father, the favorite son, uh, because the firstborn of his preferred wife, Rachel. And he alone was given a long coat of multicolors. Of course, that was not the intention of Jacob to cause strife and misunderstanding among the brothers, but unwittingly, his favoritism actually provoked dislike and jealousy of his siblings. Now, it seems that Jacob had not learned from his own experience. We remember during our last talk that his mother, Rebecca, favored him over his elder brother Esau, and that caused great animosity between the two brothers. So he himself experienced that, how because of the mother's bias for him, which resulted in the two brothers having great difficulties in their relationship. And yet he had not learned from that experience. He favored Joseph. Of course, not Joseph's fault, but because of that, then the brothers were upset and angry with Joseph. When Joseph was 17 years, he had two dreams. In the first dream, Joseph and his brothers, they were gathering bundles of grain. So 12 bundles altogether. And all of a sudden in the dream, the 12, the 11 bundles of his brothers bow down to him. And in his second dream, he dreamt of the sun and the moon and 12 stars. And of the 12, 11 of them plus the sun and the moon bow down to his star. Now, these dreams implied his supremacy, that he was one up to his brothers. And when he disclosed that dreams to them, not really suspecting any uh, ill feelings from his brothers, he just shared the dreams. And when the brothers heard about these two dreams, they were, of course, very angry with him. Who are you? Who do you think you are? We bow down to you. But somehow these two dreams, they were actually prophesying about years to come. We will talk about that. Now, because his brothers were jealous of him, so they plotted to kill him. But then among them, there was Reuben, who tried to talk them up. No, don't kill him, don't kill him. Let us just throw him into the cistern, a deep well. And Reuben had the intention of coming back to rescue the brother later. However, before that all could happen, the brothers, they saw a camel caravan carrying spices and perfumes passing by. So they decided to sell him to these merchants. Now, then how would they answer to their father? So they decided to took that multicolored coat that the father gave him. They killed a goat and painted the blood on his coat and showed that to their father. And of course, the father was very sad, thinking that he was eaten by the wild animal. So through this merchant, eventually Joseph was sold to Potiphar, who was the captain of Pharaoh's guard. And Joseph was a very diligent, hardworking, dedicated, and talented young man. So he gained favor of this captain and eventually was appointed the superintendent of his household. Then something happened. Potiphar's wife tried to seduce Joseph, which Joseph refused. He resisted that temptation. And so this woman was angry and made a false accusation against Joseph. And because of that, and Joseph was put in prison. Here we see Joseph's integrity. He was courageous enough to resist that temptation, knowing that even that would cause misfortune upon him, and in this case, imprisonment. We mentioned that Joseph has had a very special gift from God, the ability to interpret dreams. So when he was in prison, again, being a very humble and yet very talented young man, the officer in charge of prison selected him to take charge of other prisoners. And at that time, two other men came to prisons. They offended Pharaoh. They were the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. And while in prison, both of them had dreams, but they were not able to understand the meaning of their dreams. And when Joseph heard about them, he asked that perhaps he could assist them in interpreting the dreams. For the cupbearer, the dream was about a vine with 3 branches that was budding, and they soon blossomed and produced grapes. And in his dream, he saw himself squeezing these grapes into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Joseph explained to him that the dream meant that he would be restored to his previous job to serve Pharaoh as a cupbearer. And true enough, 3 days later, he was released and restored to his previous position. The baker also had a dream. It was about 3 baskets full of bread for Pharaoh. But all of a sudden, birds came and ate the bread out of the baskets. Joseph explained to the baker that unfortunately, this dream meant that he would be executed in 3 days' time, and his flesh to be eaten by birds. And that actually happened. Then 2 years later, Pharaoh also had a dream, and he consulted all his court officials, the sages, the wise men, so forth. It was a dream about 7 lean cows which devoured 7 fat cows. And the second dream of similar nature, 7 scanty years of corn devoured 7 full and ripe years of corn. And Pharaoh's advisors were not able to interpret these dreams to Pharaoh. And the news spread around. Then the cupbearer remembered Joseph. Now, when the cupbearer left the prison, he was supposed to say a few words on behalf of Joseph, but he had totally forgotten about Joseph. But on this occasion, 2 years later, he suddenly remembered Joseph, who interpreted his dream. So he told Pharaoh about Joseph. And so Joseph was called to meet Pharaoh, and he interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh. The fat cows, as well as the full and ripe years of corn, represent 7 years of abundance, great produce, great harvest. And then the 7 lean cows and the 7 scanty years of corn represent 7 lean years of famine. Then the practical decision must be made if the dreams were to come true. Pharaoh accepted his interpretations and the advice to store the surplus produce during those 7 years of great produce. And because of his wisdom, Pharaoh decided to make him chancellor of Egypt. It's kind of a prime minister equivalent. And he also married an Egyptian wife. And then during that 7 years of abundance, Joseph was put in charge to administer the whole economy of produce. So they built storehouses and so forth to keep all these produce and carefully weigh them, store them properly in preparation for the famine. So when famine came, it was really very severe, and the surrounding countries, they all suffered. People had not enough food in those places, except Egypt, because they were prepared for the 7 years of famine. In the second year of the famine, Joseph's brothers were sent to Egypt to buy food because where they stayed was also lack of food. And the brothers came before the chancellor, but of course they did not recognize him. Joseph was dressed like an Egyptian, and also the brothers, when they meet the chancellor, they could not see him face to face. They had to bow low, so they did not recognize him. But of course, Joseph recognized them, and so he agreed to provide them food and so forth. But among the brothers who went to Egypt, the youngest one, the full brother of Joseph, Benjamin, was not among them. And of course, because Jacob was afraid that this last son of his would also be lost, so very protective of Benjamin. So Jacob did not allow Benjamin to follow the other brothers to Egypt. But then Joseph asked about the younger brother. And then he wanted to see the younger brother. So he devised a plan to make sure that the brothers agree to bring Benjamin to Egypt to meet him. Now, when all these things were happening and so forth, the brothers, they were in a dilemma because they realized that if they told the father, Jacob, that the chancellor of Egypt must see the younger brother, his father would be quite reluctant. And then they remember Joseph, and they spoke in their Hebrew language, of course, among themselves, that now we only have this younger brother, Benjamin, but Joseph, we sold him to the merchants and so forth. So they were whispering and talking among themselves. Of course, they did not suspect that the chancellor could understand them. But of course, Joseph heard all these things, and that conversation among the brothers actually caught his emotions. So the chapter says that Joseph wept very emotionally. So he left the chamber, and then he came back. He came back, and then he plotted to get the brothers. So eventually, they brought the brothers to him, and but when they returned after receiving all the food that they needed, Joseph plotted to retain Benjamin by secretly placing a silver cup in his sack. So when the brothers collected all the food they needed, they left. Uh, Joseph sent officers to go after them, and eventually they found the silver cup in Benjamin's bag. And then they confronted, so they were brought back to the chancellor, and the chancellor confronted them. What happened? Why do you steal my cup? And so forth. And then he demanded that, okay, since the cup was found in Benjamin's bag, so Benjamin must stay. Uh, he must stay in Egypt. The rest of you, you can go back to your country. And it was at that point that Judah, one of the brothers, volunteered to take the place of Benjamin. He he was very remorseful. He thought that, yeah, we already lost Joseph. Now even the second son from Rachel, if anything happened to him, that would break the father's heart. And so Judah volunteered to take the place of Benjamin. So after all these happenings and so forth, Joseph could not take it anymore. And so he revealed himself to the brothers. He brought them closer to him, showed them his face. Look at me, look at me. Of course, the brothers, they were shocked and frightened. But then he told them not to be afraid. And he assured them that although they meant evil when they wanted to kill him and then eventually sold him to the merchants, but somehow God had meant it good for him and for the family. And so he talked with them and eventually sent them back again and asked them to invite his father, Jacob, and the entire household to Egypt. That was when Joseph and the whole family eventually they migrated to Egypt to stay. And of course, eventually the Hebrew population grew so big that they became a threat to the Egyptians. But that would be the story for our next episode on Moses. So we will leave that aside first. But years later, when Jacob became old and then died, the brothers, they were still feeling very guilty, and they thought that now our father had died, so now Joseph would take revenge. He did not punish them at that time because father was still alive, but now father uh, had died, so they were very frightened. They thought that Joseph would do something nasty to them. But then Joseph wept and told them, no, no, I have no intention at all to take revenge. I had I bear no grudges against any of you because I see all these happenings as God's plan for our family. God allowed that to happen in order to save the lives of the whole family. So he comforted them and showed great benevolence, and they were reconciled. Yeah, I mentioned at the beginning of the talk that, yeah, Joseph is my hero. You see all these great virtues manifested by him. So to sum up, in this story of Joseph, we realize that he enjoyed his father's favor, and unwittingly that aroused jealousy of his brothers. In our last talk, we reminded parents, be careful of that. When you favor one child over others, uh, maybe consciously or unconsciously, but the result can be very bad on the children. In this case, the other brothers were so upset that they even wanted to kill Joseph. But by the grace of God, they did not kill him. They simply sold him to the merchants, and eventually he landed up in Egypt. But that's another reminder to parents that you need to be very aware of how your unequal treatments to your children may cause great harms to them. And Joseph was gifted with the gift of interpreting dreams, but he did not use it just for selfish interest. He learned to use that extraordinary gift to serve the people, serve his fellow prisoners, the Pharaoh, and then his family. And he was a man of integrity. He resisted the temptation of the wife of the chief army officer uh, at the cost of he being imprisoned. But because of his good nature, his virtues, and so forth, although he was accused of that, but still those people around him, those in authority, somehow they still treated him well. For example, in this case, he could have been killed uh, for the alleged uh, misdeed against the wife of the officer, but somehow he was only being imprisoned. And then by being able to interpret dreams, first for the cupbearers and the bakers, and then later on for Pharaoh, he showed his wisdom, and he won favor with Pharaoh and was appointed Chancellor of Egypt. And in that position, he served the people, although not his people, but in a way the Pharaoh was kind enough to treat him well, a foreign talent, and he served Egypt for many years with great dedications. And eventually, when he was reunited with his brothers, he was very kind to them and very assuring to them. He forgave them and assured them that he had no grudges, no resentment against them. In fact, he saw the hand of God working in all those events, most of all, to allow him to protect his family during that time of great famine. The experience of Joseph, some people call him Joseph the dreamer because he interpreted dreams, and and I call him the protector of families because of his role in preserving his family and other families. But that whole experience testifies to the words of St. Paul, Romans 8:28. I like this golden verse, so memorize it. Romans 8:28. All things work out for good to those who love God. All things work out for good to those who love God. We know that many things happen to us. Sometimes good events, sometimes unfortunate events. And many of these happenings are actually beyond our control. There are so many factors that could influence the development of various events in our life, the whole social environment, the people around us, our superiors, etc., etc. And they are totally beyond our control. But when we learn to see God's hand working in all these events, we surrender ourselves to God and allow Him to lead and guide us. And somehow God will bring the best out of the situation for those who trust in Him. Now, of course, in every situation, we do what we can. We try to overcome the difficulties and hardships. We do our best to confront the situations and to make good with all the situation, etc. But ultimately, it's important for us to surrender to God and allow Him to be the one to take control and to lead and guide us along. Before I make that final remark, I would like us to say a few words about dreams. From a psychological point of view first, and then spiritual point of view.
So I'm talking about the understanding dreams. That they are linked to our unconscious and subconscious self. They reveal our inner thoughts and feelings connected to our lived experiences. So, of course, many things happen in life, externally and internally. How all these experiences in our dreams in some way. So the dreams provide clues actually to better understand ourselves because they are somehow connected to us. If we can understand the meaning of our dreams, then hopefully that can help us to cope with reality better. Dreams are not meant to let us escape from reality, but rather to help us to understand and cope with reality better. So one way we can do is that if we have some very significant dreams, at the moment when we wake up, we must try to remember it. And so the way to remember it is to note down the dreams immediately. Somehow, if you don't do that, say you woke up in the middle of night, 3 a.m., and then you dream. If you do not note it down immediately at 7 a.m., you awaken again, you try to record the dream, you realize that you forgot it. So the best way for you to remember is to note down immediately. And to also realize that actually you are the best interpreter of your own dreams. People ask other people, what do you think of dreams? But actually, you are the best interpreter because you know yourself. You have various experiences.
Father? Breaking up, yeah.
Hello, Ken?
The last 2 points, you might need to repeat again because you broke up there. Yeah. Maybe the fan is on or the aircon is on.
No. How is it now?
Yes, better.
Very clear. Actually, there's one question, Father, about
Wait.
dream.
Let me
Yeah.
finish. Huh? So
When
you are
talk-
the best interpreter of your dreams. So know yourself and then bring it to prayers. And in your prayer, talk to God about your dreams and ask Him what He wants to reveal to you. You may be able to connect it with some biblical passages as you recall the dreams and as you pray. And if God meant to speak to you in a special way through your dreams. And if you are open in your dialogue with God, in your prayer, then you will be able to understand the meaning of the dreams. But do remember that dreams should not take over your life. Don't escape yourself into dreams and speak to people that you dream of this or bring up that, and then kind of draw yourself into your own dreams and then neglect your real life. So do not use dreams to deny the reality of the life, but rather they are just aids for you to help you to understand yourself and your life better. But if doing that, praying and so forth, you still don't understand the meaning of your dreams, so be it. Be relaxed about it. Don't have to insist that you must understand the meaning of the dreams. If really they are important, and if God wants to show you something of it, God will reveal to you. If nothing come out of it, so be it. Don't worry, don't get upset, don't panic, and just be relaxed about it. There's nothing wrong if you cannot remember your dreams or you cannot understand and interpret your dreams. So later on, you can share these questions. St. Paul says, as in my sharing earlier, all things work out for good to those who love God. Romans 8:28. How relevant is this verse to Joseph? We talk about that a little bit. So briefly, you don't have to spend too much time on that. But share more. How does it apply to you personally? Okay, before you go to that, yeah, any questions?
Only one which you have answered, Father, about how we interpret dreams in our modern context. In the New Testament, St. Joseph also had dreams too. Are we to take it literally, or were these dreams a writer's way of interpreting to all theophanies?
Yeah, we can only speculate, of course. We do not know fully. But in the case of the Old Testament Joseph that we are talking about now, apparently that was a special gift that God has granted him, and he used it wisely and appropriately. In the case of Joseph, the foster father of Jesus, it was a unique dream in that very special circumstances about whether to take Mary as his spouse, and God used that as a way to assure him. But that going to sleep in the case of Joseph was also an indication of his surrendering of himself to God, because he was not able to explain and understand what happened to Mary. He was confused. He was at a loss of what to do. And so he kind of resigned himself to the hands of God and allowed God to take over. And God, in his dream, assured him of the working of the Holy Spirit in that event, and assisted him in accepting Mary to be his spouse.
Oh, same Jonathan Pang also mentioned there is professional dream interpreters. Should we bring our dreams to them like Pharaoh, or our spiritual directors?
I have not heard of professional interpreters. We do have psychologists, depending on their training, who some psychoanalysts, for example, they would interpret dreams in terms of the subconscious aspect of a person, especially the inner desires and inner working and so forth. So from the psychological perspective, I think that can be an aid to help a person understand the inner self. But of course, as I said, that actually the best person to interpret is yourself, because you know yourself, you know your inside out. And if you bring it to prayer, then God can reveal to you. Yet again, I also mentioned that do not place excessive emphasis on dreams also. If after consulting some wise men and after praying and so forth, you still do not have so-called answer to the meaning of your dream, so be it. Don't be too obsessed with it. Just let it be.
Two ladies, Doreen and Christine, have the same thoughts about the title you gave Joseph. Saint Joseph, the foster father of our Lord, also has this title. So, Father, you want to make any comments? Because they are thinking about it. Probably tonight they'll dream about it too.
I'm not sure the gospel writer make a deliberate reference of Joseph, the foster father of Jesus, with this Joseph of the Old Testament, but they seem to share certain things in common. So it's not surprising that then people who read the Bible make connections between the two persons. And the lesson from both of them we learn is that both of them were very kind of submissive to God, and they realized that certain events in their life were beyond their control, and they kind of allowed God to take control of those situations and submit themselves to the guidance of the Holy Spirit, and all things work out for good for both of them.